There is so much to get to because I want to talk about everything. We want to talk about Beautiful Boy, we want to talk about Tweak, we want to talk about what you guys are doing lately. I'm sure there are going to be a couple of questions from people in the audience. But first, I want to ask you about the book Hive. I read it. I think it's fantastic. My wife is reading it. My son is reading it. What made you guys decide to co-author that book now?
You start.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. This is, I love this bookstore so much. This is, Nick and I have been everywhere around the country, and now it feels so good to be home. So thank you for coming. And also, I want to thank Mike here. I mean, Nick and I, we've had experience with addiction in our family, and we've met a lot of people who are impacted by this. But Mike is a doctor in the trenches, working with people every single day and saving lives. And I didn't know you had all those degrees, and you were also I feel like I'm kind of intimidated now. Well, as I said, we sort of were brought into this world of addiction without planning to, and I was like maybe a lot of you who had an image of what drug addicts, which is what we called them then, look like. And they didn't look like my son, they didn't look like our family. Of course, I learned over the course of time that they look like all of us and all of our kids. When we went through 10 years of hell, we'll talk a little bit, I guess, about that, but at a certain point, when Nick was doing better, and after 10 years of struggle, he was clean, and he'd been sober for about a year and a half. We decided to go ahead and tell our family story, and the reason was because when this happened to us, when we were blindsided, and I wanted people to know that yes, this can happen to you, and if it does happen to you, don't ignore it. Intervene as early as you can, and so so I went forward and I wrote this article, and then I wrote the book Beautiful Boy, and Nick wrote Tweak, and that sort of changed everything, I think, for us. It sort of opened up a door to the suffering that is addiction, because addiction is unlike other diseases, other things that we face in our families. We don't talk about it. It's something that we are ashamed of, and it comes with guilt, and there's this stigma around it. So when that's what people responded to when they read our books. It was like, we are not alone. And one of the questions that kept coming up, and still does, is what can we do about it? The numbers that we just heard about of kids who are using, and the number of those kids who do try drugs who will become addicted is horrifying, and it's horrifying now at a time when you don't have to go far. You read the newspaper pretty much any day and you hear about what's going on. The fact that we're losing 200 people every single day, and addiction is now killing more people in our country than under 50 than anything. So the question is, what can we do? Can we first of all prevent our kids from using? Can we prevent addiction? Can we treat addiction? And the answer is that we learned that you can, but in the meantime we're doing every single thing wrong. And so we decided that that was the next thing we wanted to do, is have a conversation with kids to help them grow up at a time that is really hard to be a child, to be a teenager.
That's right. And you mentioned at the beginning of the book how you felt uncomfortable, and really when you started using wasn't really getting it as you felt normal, as they described it.
Yeah, I mean, they've actually done studies which I thought were really interesting, where they asked young people the reason that they, first they actually asked parents why they think young people use drugs, like what the number one reason is, and parents overwhelmingly said that they felt like it was because young people wanted to have fun and they wanted to party, and also because of peer pressure. But when they ask kids the same question, the thing that kids identify more than anything else is the reason that they use drugs is because of stress, actually. And for me, when I first started smoking pot, back when I was just 11 or 12, I remember when I felt the drug for the first time, it really did feel like kind of the answer to my problems. Like I felt all this anxiety before that, and I felt really uncomfortable in my own skin, and like I just didn't fit in. And for me, smoking pot, it took that away. It made me feel confident, and like I could talk to girls, and I really I wanted to do it as much as I possibly could. But I really didn't have the information then, to know what addiction was, or what the sort of the dangers of having that kind of response to drugs and alcohol were for someone. And I remember when my dad, when I was, I was just going into my teenage years or something. My dad gave me this book that was like everything that a young person needs to know about puberty, and I remember having that book and it being really helpful, because there were all these questions that I had that I didn't want to ask anyone, and so I remember reading the book and being like, oh, this is helpful. And so I think for us with high, we kind of wanted that to be like a similar thing, but for drugs, which maybe are not as prevalent as puberty, but are maybe almost as prevalent as puberty at this point, which is unfortunate. But there was so much information that I didn't know, and the thing with pot now is obviously I think it's a question that's sort of on everyone's mind because of legalization, and I think that the dangerous thing with that is that young people will think that somehow because we've legalized marijuana that means that it's safe, and that there aren't that sort of the verdict's out, and that there's no it's not possible to get addicted to it, like all the myths that people hear about it. And the thing for me, looking back, I see because pot was a depressant, as I was smoking more and more to try to feel better, the pot was actually making me more and more depressed, and so I was really in this like vicious circle where I would be smoking more pot to try to feel better, and the pot would continue to make me more depressed, and then I tried to smoke more pot to feel better. And it got to the point by the time I was like a senior in high school that I was smoking from the moment I got up to the moment I went to sleep at night, and it really wasn't giving me that same feeling that it had before. And the other thing, and something that we talk about in high, is that period of time is when your brain's developing. It's when you're learning how to have relationships. It's when you're learning how to fail and succeed and all these things. And for me, I was never having to learn any of those coping skills because I was always just smoking pot or drinking or something, so that I didn't have to feel any of those feelings. So when I finally did get sober, or when I first tried to get sober when I was in my early 20s, I found that I had just no ability to cope with any of the life things that life throws at you. So it's really important information, I think, that young people need, and it's something that they're not getting. And it's one of the reasons that I think we're so grateful to be in this position, is just to be able to talk to people about this stuff, because it does feel so important.
It is, and it's interesting when you're talking about that at such a young age at 11. Think about your brain is really, we call it plastic about it. It's still forming. Your executive part of your brain doesn't fully form until you're about 26. So you're thinking you've been not forming according to that, at that age, and then you get to 26, like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be an adult now. And it's also, I think it was one of the things that struck me. It's great to hear it from someone who's been through it in a realistic way. A lot of people in the room are probably not old enough to remember the DARE program when it first came out. But I remember sitting in New York, I was in junior high school, and the police officer came in and said, listen, if you take these pills, you're going to see all sorts of colors, and this is going to happen. And I remember thinking, well, that sounds kind of cool. But what my son said when he read about what you were saying was, wow, And it was much more meaningful coming from you than it was from an uncool dad, right? Telling you the same sort of thing. So it's great that you're getting that out there. I wonder how it felt for you at first, sharing this story for you, because these are intensely personal stories. It's a family system story, but it kind of centered around what was happening with you. So I wanted to ask you, how did it feel at first, even when you first wrote this article?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I remember the DARE program too. I had the exact same experience. I went to school in San Francisco, and there was an SFPD officer that came in, and she was talking about a guy who was on PCP and how he jumped off like a 3-story building and broke both of his legs, but like ran 3 blocks and then fought off like 5 cops and flipped over a cop car or something. And I was like, man, that sounds amazing. But yeah, I mean, you know, it was super scary at first to have our story so public. You know, my dad talked to me before writing that article for the New York Times Magazine, and you know, he asked me how I felt about having, you know, our story out there, and you know, he was going to use my name in the article and everything. But at the time, I guess I just remember feeling like, you know, we'd gone through so much hell with this, you know, this disease of mine, and that it felt like if there was any way that our experience could sort of help other people to not feel so alone, or to feel like, I don't know, they were able to sort of see something in our story that they could relate to, or that might be helpful for them. It seemed worth it to me, and you know, as scary as it was when, and I know my dad had the same experience, but when the article came out, it really was the opposite of what we feared. I mean, we just had so many people coming up to us and sharing their own stories about what they'd gone through, and it really did feel like, sort of by opening up and putting it out there and being so honest, that it kind of seemed to allow or encourage other people to do that too. And so we just heard from people all across the country, and you know, it feels like such a gift to be in a position where people are sharing their stories with us like that. And not to jump ahead, but even with the movie, I mean, that was exactly the same reason that we wanted to sort of go forward with having the movie come out. Was we just felt like, you know, we had such a positive experience with the books and being able to connect with people across the country. And so our hope was with the movie that it would just be like that, but on an even bigger scale.
And that seems to be what it was. And you know, we can talk about the movie, we can jump wherever we want to. You know, with the movie, and I think about you writing this and putting this out there, what comes to mind is that my grandmother used to say, you're only as happy as your least happy child. Right? And you went through that, so how was that for you? Writing? Yeah, you know, yeah, well, sort of the experience leading into the movie, wherever you want to start with that.
Yeah, that quote is it. I mean, any parent knows what that feels like. I mean, it's when, you know, Nick was 11, my other son, my next son, Nick's little brother, was born, Jasper, and then a couple of years later, Daisy was born. And when Nick, you know, when this happened and Nick was in trouble, we did the best we could to take care of the other kids, you know, Daisy and Jasper, and to make things as normal and as stable as we could. But in the meantime, the path was really clear. You know, my son was dying, and I was going to do everything I could. So that didn't happen. There was I don't know, it just was what I was going to do. And I feel like there's something that we hear, I know that you hear this, treating people in this world around addiction, that we have to sort of let go of our kids at some point and stand back and let them hit bottom and let them figure this out themselves. And you know, I couldn't do it. I mean, but beyond that, you know, I really believe that it's kind of like, it's the worst message to give to parents, because it contradicts everything we are as parents. We want to take care of our kids, we want to save them if we can, and we will not stop until we can't. I mean, I believe that.
It's also the only disease where people say, you gotta hit rock bottom, but like no one says that about cancer or cardiovascular.
Yeah, it's like, it's criminal, I believe, and I think it's killing people. I hear from people all the time, they write me and say that, they were in the treatment system like we were, and we went to family groups, and they went to family therapy, and sometimes they went to Al-Anon meetings, and for all the good stuff that came out of all that, there was this message that was repeated over and over and over again, and you have to stand back, and you have to hang up the phone, you have to lock the door, and they have to figure this out, and to jump to the movie, there's one scene in the movie that actually, when I see it, it makes me cringe. It really, really, really is. It's when the guy, the dad, me, Steve Carell, whoever it is, he does. His son had been in and out of rehab many, many times, and he continued to he got well, and then he would relapse over and over again. And the dad just got so tired and so frustrated, and he had heard this message over and over again that you can't do it for them, that you have to let them do it themselves. So he does hang up the phone, and the reason it's so horrifying to me is because it's exactly what happened to us, and I did hang up the phone. And I hung up the phone, and I just lost it. I was in tears, and I was terrified. And we were just really lucky, because Nick ended up going into treatment himself. But I've heard from so many people, and they write me, and they say, we heard this message over and over again, and they told us we had to practice tough love, and we had to let them hit bottom. So I did that. I hung up the phone, I shut the door, and my child went out and overdosed and died. And one dad said to me, I repeated this, but one dad said to me, was my love tough enough? So anyway, I guess that message is, it really, it's wrong. It scares me. I mean, it's like saying to somebody, as one of your colleagues says, somebody has diabetes, you're going to wait until you have to amputate their leg before you treat them. And the answer is no. If somebody has a serious illness that's going to get worse, we want to stop it as soon as we can. We want to hold them up so that they don't hit bottom.
Right, and everyone's on board with that, right? It's interesting to me that report a couple of years ago, that addiction was a brain disease, not a moral failing, right? And in my line of work, we've known that forever, right? Like but it was like news to a lot of people. And
I was going to say, you're right.
And it still is, and we do struggle with it. There still is. We love to say how, oh, isn't it great that the stigma's going away? But it's going, right? I mean, I guess things go, but it's not gone. Which is why it's helpful to talk about all of this. And in that regard, you mentioned in the beginning of High that you had been through multiple treatments, and in the movie, multiple treatments, but you said it wasn't until you were finally diagnosed with comorbid illness. Like, there was other stuff going on, like it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I really had a hard time coming to understand or believe that addiction is a disease and that it's not a choice. I mean, I really fought that. I thought, it just didn't make sense to me. I thought that I would be able to have control over my own behavior, and when I was in rehab and they were telling me that I had a disease, I felt like it was something they just were saying to us addicts so that we would like let ourselves off the hook or something. I mean, I thought I was smarter than they were, but I kept trying different things, like where I would try just drinking. Like there was a certain point where I'd gotten off hard drugs and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna drink. Like I've never had a problem with that, and really the moment that I started drinking again, it's like this phenomenon of craving would start and this obsession, and I could not stop. And it wasn't even that I went back to hard drugs, I just was drinking from the moment I got up to the moment that I passed out at night. And the same with smoking pot later. When I tried just doing that, it really, I mean, it took me being an idiot and having to just pound it into my head that whenever I put a mind-altering substance into my body, this phenomenon of craving starts, and this obsession, and yeah, it really is almost impossible for me to stop. And I think it wasn't until I finally came to really believe that I was able to start to really kind of treat this disease like a disease. And I guess the other side of that is that it also took me being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression before I could really start to again like treat both of these diseases that I have like what they are, which is diseases. And it's really frustrating to me that I was in I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 different treatment centers before I was even tested psychologically. So I was in my mid-20s when I finally was given that psychological testing so that I could be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And to me, when I look at sort of my recovery, I think of it as being like a puzzle, and there's all these different pieces that sort of have to come together to allow me to get sober and to stay sober. And it's different for everyone. Not every person that's an addict has a co-occurring mental health disorder, but I think a lot of us do. And now I think it is becoming more and more standard for all treatment centers to be dual diagnosis, but they aren't all. And but anyway, and for me, getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder really was a big piece of that puzzle, and getting on the medication for that was a big piece of the puzzle. So was 12-step stuff was definitely a big piece of the puzzle for me, and doing the work within that program, and just I guess as I sort of get older, I feel like I just keep sort of finding more and more what those puzzle pieces are. And it can be stuff that's really simple. It can be like going on walks with my dogs, or going out to dinner with my wife or something. I mean, just learning to sort of love life and be happy being alive is really like such a miracle. I mean, that's the thing. Like when I was growing up, I just felt like the way that I felt was how I was always going to feel, and I was just never going to know joy the way that normal people know joy, and I was never going to be able to experience like contentment with regular everyday things the way that I saw other people seeming to experience that. And that was one of the reasons that I never asked for help when I was growing up, because I didn't think anyone could help me. I didn't think there was an alternative. So knowing now that there are people, I mean, like yourself, that are working in all communities to help young people who are struggling with this stuff to figure out how to sort of treat that feeling of not fitting in, and of being uncomfortable in your own skin, and of not feeling joy when the way that other people feel joy. The fact that there are people out there who can help us to feel that way, it's so incredible. And I mean, that's what's so great about this, is that there's so much hope out there, and I know it can be hard, and especially, my dad was just talking about the statistics about overdoses, and I've had a number of friends who died of overdoses in the last year, especially, actually. So I know that I just got so lucky, and my family got so lucky, and there's nothing that separates me from them. I just got lucky. But there is so much hope out there for those of us who are struggling with this stuff, and that's such a cool thing to be able to talk about, because like I said, I just didn't think that would ever be the case for me. And it's not just me. I've seen it with the thousands of people that we've met all across the country, and the guys that I work with in the program, and it really is it's the opposite of having addiction, having mental health disorders. It's not a death sentence. It's not the end of life. It's really the beginning, and that is it's something that's really cool to be able to say today.
Yeah, I think I like
I was just going to say one thing. You are an addiction psychiatrist. We went through 10 years of treatment programs, inpatient programs, outpatient programs. Nick lived in sober living houses. He saw all kinds of therapists. We didn't even know there was such a thing as an addiction psychiatrist, which tells you that we are dealing with a system where I still think the number is ridiculous. People, I hear about it all the time. People go through treatment after treatment after treatment, and they start to think, well, treatment can't work. People can't get well. Well, maybe if you saw a doctor, maybe if we had a system in this country that actually was treating people for a disease because they have a disease, and we don't. And we are so far from that still. I don't know the percentage of places, but most of the places in this country still don't treat this as a disease, and don't see a doctor who's qualified.
So there is resistance, and you guys talk about this, and I appreciate that you guys talk about the treatment options for different people, because no two people are the same, right? No, we talk of addiction as if it's one entity, right? But it's very heterogeneous. It's like a couple hundred years ago, if you had cancer, you had cancer. That was it. Now we know there's like 300 kinds of cancer, and every individual patient deserves to be treated individually. There are still some, there are touch points within the treatment industry that you might have heard about. Like some people say, no, you absolutely have to be abstinence-based. And then there are other people who say you absolutely need to be on medication. I generally take the position that every person's individual, and we should be looking at what that individual needs, and no one should judge anybody else's recovery. What have you guys heard about as you travel around the country? What's the general perception that you get about treatment these days?
It's a disaster. It's a mess, and that's why that's why we're losing so many people, because they are not getting the treatment that they need. There are places where we know, the number one killer right now of within that group of drug people who are dying because of drug overdose is people who are dying because of opioids, prescription medications, and heroin and fentanyl. And there was just a study that I'm sure you know about that said that 2/3 of the programs in this country don't allow addiction medications, when we know that addiction medications treat opioid addiction better than anything else that we have. I guess the statistic says that if somebody is on these medications, they're twice as likely to stay sober. And as the doctor said, that if we had a medication for another disease that would increase the prognosis by 2, we would think it was a miracle drug, and yet places don't allow their patients to have this medication, and over and over and over again. In part, I think it will change, like you said. It changes incredibly slowly, but we are still in the dark ages in many ways. I mean, Nic was in programs that still happen today, and I know this because I hear from people that he got in trouble because he was a kid, because he was a teenager, and he was also a teenager on methamphetamine. And so if a teenager is not going to follow rules, so he would get in trouble for not following the rules, and his punishment was in one place he had to clean the bathroom with a toothbrush and the grout between the tiles. I mean, as if that's a treatment for somebody who's ill. And another time he got in trouble, I think because it's like the military thing where his bed wasn't sort of tight enough, and he was out there. I talked to him, and he spent the day with a pair of scissors out in the yard cutting the grass. Is that how we treat diseases? And that's, I guess, the tragedy right now is that it's not that we know how to treat this disease, but we aren't.
Well, and then the other problem, of course, is insurance companies that won't pay for treatment, and treatment being just ridiculously expensive. And there's county-run places that are really great, and there's scholarship programs, but they are few and far between. And I was in a treatment center with a young boy whose insurance ran out, and they kicked him out that night, and he literally that same night overdosed, relapsed and overdosed and died. So it is really, and we have a long way to go for sure, but it is, it's true that I think that it is getting slightly better. I mean, and even just in the 12-step community, they can be very resistant to change and to sort of new ideas. And I've even been hearing, even within the 12-step community, more acceptance of addiction replacement therapies, and I mean it's starting to sort of churn. And the thing with that is that obviously it's like we're talking about like Suboxone, buprenorphine. It's definitely the lesser of two evils. I mean, it still is a bummer to be on this medication that you're being. I mean, I was on it. You are physically like you need to take it or you'll get sick. But at the same time, it is totally possible to be on that medication and to live a totally normal life, and it's not mind altering, so it doesn't affect your mood or your brain. And it can literally save people's lives if they're chronic relapsers on opiates. It can save them from overdosing, and that just seems like that should be the bottom line. It's saving people's lives.
Yeah, and just as a point of reference, so everyone knows, because we all certainly know this, but there are only 3 medications out there to treat opioid use disorder. There's methadone, which has been around since about the 70s. There's buprenorphine, which Suboxone is the brand that people know about. And there's naltrexone. And methadone's a full opiate. It's just taking one opiate to replace another one. And people say it's not just trading one addiction for another, but it's really changing a lifestyle for another. So instead of having to go out and make money in all sorts of awful ways, you go to a doctor and you're administered medicine to ease your suffering. Same thing with buprenorphine. Naltrexone blocks opiates from working, so you, essentially if you take it, nothing happens, and it does decrease craving for some people. And I guess we need more. I guess to your point, in a perfect world, no one would need medicine, any medicine, right? In a perfect world, I wouldn't be on Lipitor. The Jets would win the Super Bowl every year. But it is what it is right now, right?
Yeah, people are dying. And that's what I always say. It's like, you'd rather have this person be dead or on a medication that, is kind of a bummer to get off of.
And that brings me to another point. You started, and I thought this was really interesting. This was a great idea. You started a new hashtag called I Carry Narcan.
Right.
Has anybody heard of Narcan? Does people know what Narcan is? And you've got yours on you. You know what? I got mine on my tray. I carry Narcan as well. Yeah. So this can save someone's life. Narcan is an overdose reversal agent. So essentially, if someone overdoses and is essentially dead, you can revive them with this. And you can get this over the counter. 72,000 Americans died last year because of overdose. Think about that. That's not just 72,000 individuals, and that's 72,000 people's sons or daughters. That's 72,000 families who are never going to get that person back. And there's even controversy about this, right? People are saying, well, if you give people Narcan, it's a license to use. What do you guys think about that? He asks.
Well, it's ridiculous. Even just for me with the needle exchanges and stuff, that saved my life. I made it through, 5 years of being an IV drug user, and and made it through. Miraculously, but also because we had these programs, these harm reduction programs, and I guarantee you, if I didn't have a needle exchange, I would have used whatever needle anyone had, because I did not think that I was ever going to live past the next 6 months. So the idea of caring about some disease that I was going to have for the rest of my life, yeah. But because needle exchanges were there and it was relatively easy to go and access them, I would go and access them. So yeah, all these things are incredibly life-saving, and I think with the Narcan, I don't know where we were, somewhere we were traveling recently where there was a principal who had the high school who had been completely against any kind of drug education stuff coming into the schools besides like DARE. And then there was a student who had overdosed in the bathroom, and one of the other students had Narcan, gave it to the student that was overdosing, saved his life, and the principal, knew that all this had happened, and so he completely changed his, mind about everything, and was bringing drug education into the schools and bringing Narcan into the schools, and it was amazing to see that, and such a cool story.
Amazing to have something like that happen at home in order to bring that
right. I know that's the
around.
frustrating part.
Right. So now we're talking about the movie. I've asked a couple of important questions about the movie. How did you feel about the actors that portrayed both of you?
Well, the whole thing about the movie was just really weird. I think it was. The thing is that I ended up only seeing. I didn't want to see it at all. When, the producers. I just knew it was going to be really hard. We lived it. We lived it for 10 years, and it was 10 years of hell. And then we wrote about it, and that was, reliving it, and it was really, I think, a useful thing for us as well. It helped serve as cathartic to process things through writing. But with the movie, it was different in that we had no control whatsoever. about what was going to happen. Once we decided that we trusted these people to make the movie because they were really committed to telling a story about addiction that had not been told because they wanted to tell the truth. They didn't want to go for the cliches of what addiction looked like, and they didn't want to have an unrealistic happy ending or a simple ending. But it was, anyway, it was very obviously. So I did finally see it. They asked me to see it, and I did. It was devastating. I mean, what can I say? To watch it was different. It brought it all back. And though, you know, a lot of the details were different, and a lot of them was exact. I mean, I talked about that one scene that was exactly the way it happened. But to see my son in situations that I knew about and that I'd read about and I'd heard him talk about, to see it was different. And the only thing that, well, you asked about the actors. I mean, when I met, you know, the guy who was going to play me, they asked, you know, he wanted to meet, and we met, and he said to me, Steve Carell said, you know, I thought of him in the way that probably most people do, you know, Michael Scott in The Office. And, it was such a strange idea. But when we met, he said to me, he said, you know, I'm not addicted. I don't have addiction in my family like you do. He said, but when I read the script, he said, I related completely because I'm a dad. I know what it feels like. My kids were younger. His kids, I guess, were young teenagers. And he said, it terrifies me it's not just about drugs. It terrifies me to know that there is a certain point that I will not be able to protect them, that I am going to have to let go of them, and that scares me to death. And he brought that, I think, you know, to the movie. And when I watched it, part of the reason it was so hard is because, you know, it was really, emotionally, it felt true. And the only other thing I'll say about it, I'll talk about the guy who plays Nick, who's the coolest person in the world, but the other thing that, besides feeling devastated watching the movie, the other thing that happened was that, oh man, I mean, you can imagine, I felt so lucky. It was a reminder. You know, I was sitting there, and you know, we weren't in the same theater at that moment, but we were having dinner beforehand, and I did not, you know, I knew it. It's not like I forget. It's not like you forget when you go something like this, but it was a reminder on this big screen that we were so lucky, because he came so close to dying so many times.
Yeah, I felt that way too. I mean, I really, coming out of it, I felt like, yeah, like you said, it's not like we forget, but it has, you know, it's been a long time since we were going through it, and, you know, our lives have really changed, and it was just an incredible reminder of how lucky we are. And, I mean, about, you know, Timothy, it's just such an amazing person. I didn't know who he was when I met him, because I hadn't seen Call Me By Your Name, hadn't come out yet, and so I just met this like bubbly, amazing kid who was just so smart, and you know, I kind of kept having to remind myself that he was only like 21, because he just seemed so you know, mature and smart, and the questions he was asking were just so I don't know, he was like just able to really get to like the sort of heart of the matter in such a profound way, and then seeing, you know, his performance. The thing that I think was just so amazing about it is you really see the layers of what it is to be an addict, because it's not something I've ever seen portrayed accurately really on screen before, where it's like, you know, you see him you know, acting out and being belligerent and doing these things that, you know, are just so unconscionable, like stealing money from his family and breaking into their house and all these things, but you also see all the like guilt and shame that's in him at the same time. And you see too that he's just that same person that he was always. That's still there, that hasn't gone away. It's just like the drugs have come in and like hijacked him or kidnapped him or something. And the fact that you can see all of that in that one performance is really remarkable to me. So I just couldn't sort of be prouder of him as a human, and also of the job that he did in the film. And it's interesting, I think some of the criticisms of the film and have been, you know, in a way, it's interesting. It feels like some of the criticisms of the film are sort of the same criticisms that like we as addicts are faced with in sort of our daily lives, where people say, you know, why should we care about this kid who's making these bad, selfish choices? And I think people had a hard time understanding, or some people had a hard time understanding, you know, yeah, why do we care about this character who's continually making these mistakes over and over again? And you know, for me watching it, it felt so real, because when I was relapsing, I always felt like I was like on fire, and the only thing that had ever taken that fire out was the drugs and alcohol. I mean, that was the only thing that I'd ever found that could take the pain away. And so I would reach out to them again, because I would feel like I was on fire. And then as soon as I put those drugs into my body, like I said, that phenomenon of craving would start, that obsession, and it just became impossible for me to stop. And it was that cycle that we were trapped in for, you know, 10 years. And I you know, that's not something that's ever been shown on film before, and I think it was frustrating for some people, because it was frustrating to live it. But you know, they just did it in such an accurate way that I feel very, very proud of it, and I hope that it continues to. I hope people continue to see it and talk about it, because it does feel very authentic in a way that other addiction movies haven't been exactly.
Yeah, I think that it was one of the things I think that people might get the sense of is, well, there's an end of a movie, there's an end of a book, okay, that's the story, so you're done now, you're fine, right? But you're a human being still living with this every day, and your dad's still living with this, right? So what's it like now? People might say, oh, he's done, he's good, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, there's so much hope for those of us who have this disease, and for those of us who have family members who have this disease. And I mean, I have a really beautiful life now, and it's really not because of any external stuff at all. It's really just the way that I feel when I wake up in the morning, like I was saying. I mean, just the fact that I can feel joy in these little things, you know, just going to the surfing with my friends, or going to dinner with my wife, or walking my stupid dog. It really, you know, that is such a miracle, and it's and I'm so grateful for it. And those are the things that matter, and that really make my life full. But it is work to have this disease. I mean, I have to have both diseases: the disease of addiction and alcoholism, and the disease of, you know, mental health issues like bipolar disorder and depression. You know, I have to go see a psychiatrist that I work with. I used to see her every week. Now I see her a couple times a month. I take psychiatric medication every day. I have to go to the doctor and get my blood work taken to make sure that the lithium levels in my blood is not too high, and my kidneys are still working, and all this stuff. I mean, it's work that I have to do. And, you know, I go to 12-step meetings. I work with a sponsor in the program. I mean, all that stuff I actually really like doing, so it's not like it's a big chore, but, you know, it is something that I have to be diligent about, and I have to continue to treat, because it's a chronic illness, and, you know, I will have it for the rest of my life. But there's really amazing things that come out of having this disease, which is, I mean, as much as I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and you know, what we went through as a family was so painful, and you know, and I'm so lucky to be alive, but the fact that, you know, through this experience we've been able to, like I said, go around the country and talk to people about these issues and share with them. I mean, that is something that is just, you know, priceless to me, and I'm so grateful for. And gosh, you know, I was in Reno 2 weeks ago doing an event, and there was this guy that came up to me afterwards. He was like this huge guy, and he showed me his badge. He was a police officer, and he was like, "I'm the guy that would have arrested you when you were out there." But then he just started crying, and he said, "You know, my son is a heroin addict, and I don't know how to help him." And you know, I just hugged him, and you know, it was amazing. I mean, you know, that kind of thing, to be able to have those experiences with people is just incredible. I'm so grateful.
I'll be honest with you, I forgot the questions.
Well, I guess
what our life is like now.
I guess what I'll add to that is one of the things as a doctor you could probably say this more articulately than I'm going to say it, and I'm not even going to be saying it because I'm going to quote actually another psychiatrist who we know who works with Nick, which I wouldn't say unless, except I know that he wouldn't care and that he talks about it too. But anyway, she's a psychiatrist, an addiction psychiatrist, and she talked about what it is to work with people with substance use disorders, and she said that if you're a doctor and you work with people with other illnesses, success is that you treat them and you bring them back to how they were before they were sick. He said when you work with people who are addicted, success is their lives are better than they ever ever imagined they could be. And it doesn't just apply to the person who's afflicted with addiction, it applies to us, to the family. Again, like Nick said, I would never wish this on anybody. It is hell. Anybody who's going through it knows. But when you come out the other side, there's not a minute that we take, and anyone in our family takes each other for granted. Everything is so precious to us, every moment. So, people ask me all the time who are in the throes, they're in the worst of it. They're maybe estranged from a child or from a husband or wife or parents or whoever it is, and they feel that there's no hope. They will never be able to fix that broken relationship. Families, explode, they fall apart. And we're an example of it. You can't. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work, but but underlying in every family, what is the ultimate glue, I guess, underneath it all is love. I mean, you can't get that is going to stay, and it just takes time and a lot of hard work.
Yeah, so one of the things that really struck me when I read it and when I saw the movie too was when you were telling Nick, how could this be? I thought we were so close, right? And how could you have missed it if you were that close? And then what made me think about that was when you were saying, well, why should people care about these people who are making these decisions over and over? And maybe one of the reasons is because within 1 degree of separation, they probably have a relative affected by that. I mean, how many people in the room know somebody who's been affected by something like this? Right? Everybody knows, right? That's why, because we're all human beings and we're all trying to make it through life the best that we can. And because we aren't really great, particularly men, about talking about our feelings. There used to be the statistic out there that men suffer more with substance use disorders, women suffer more with mood disorders. And I used to think when women talk about it more, we drink. It's kind of the way that would happen. And now maybe events like this open people up to talking a little bit more about it and being okay with it and understanding, because knowledge is power, just like you guys were saying.
Yeah, when Daisy and Jasper were little, Nick was already in high school. Actually, he had graduated high school when the New York Times article came out. It was right around that same time, I guess, maybe a little later. But anyway, people told me that this was a mistake to publish this, that it would open up our family to judgment, scrutiny, and by then I had made a commitment to publish it, but I sort of braced myself when it came out. And we were talking about, our kids went to a school within a couple miles from where we are sitting right now. And I was scared, I was nervous about it, and of course what happened was it's what you're describing, not one person judged us. I never felt it anyway. Maybe they just didn't tell me, but I didn't feel that. But instead it was about just opening hearts, opening everybody. The people I didn't know would kind of grab me and pull me around the corner. And it wasn't necessarily about drugs or addiction, but they burst into tears and tell me about a child who has an eating disorder, or that a woman says, I grew up with with an alcoholic father, and my son, I just caught my 8-year-old son smoking pot, and I'm afraid he's going to turn out just like my dad, over and over again. Everybody, it's like, our friend of this bookstore, one of our neighbors here in Marin is Annie Lamont, and what she says is something that is just it's I think what we all need to think about every single day, which is she said that we should try not to compare our insides with other people's outsides, because it always looks like everybody else is doing great. Kids are sailing through, but nobody's sailing through. Life is hard.
That's exactly it. If I had a dime for every time I said that to a patient, I would have no more student loans. So now that said, you were the first one to get your hand up right away.
Sure. Thank you all so much. I have a question for each of you.
How preoccupied are you with what did I do wrong, what did I miss, what could I have done different, versus just, realizing that it was Nic's path? And I'm curious, does the urge to use still come up for you?
I guess I'll answer that one quickly. Just, no, not really, no. I mean, I really don't fight cravings anymore at all. Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a long time, I feel like, since I've felt cravings. It's, the thing that I fight more is like the depression and the feelings of, hopelessness and that kind of stuff that still crops up. And that's why, I guess it said this already, but it's just so important to find people to find a support system to sort of help, because I wouldn't be alive without that, and I certainly wouldn't be functioning without that, without the support of my friends in the program, and then also my psychiatrist. That the thing you were saying about men and women, I was making me laugh, because she when I first got my first job in a TV writer's room, she recommended that I read the book Lean In, which is for women in the workplace. So I guess I don't fit with the categories very well.
So about guilt, if I felt or feel guilt. Yes. Just, I think, I don't know if everybody feels it, every parent feels it, or, or maybe I'm just extra neurotic, but, I guess we all look for explanations. When Nic was growing up, I know they made many, many, many mistakes. Before I understood that addiction is a disease, I tried to figure out why he was using. I thought I'd raised this. I knew he was this amazing kid, and I knew he had morals. I knew he was, and suddenly this, and I said, what did I do wrong? And I still don't completely let myself off the hook, because I know that there were things that happened in his childhood. One of the things that can create or can add to the risk that someone will become addicted is trauma in their lives. And his mom and I had a terrible divorce. Did that make him become addicted? I think probably not, but it didn't help. And there were just many other things that I did, and I feel like at a certain point, people ask me the same question, what did I do wrong, or what? And the answer is that, Nic talked about the puzzle pieces of his recovery. I think that addiction is caused by another puzzle piece. As Michael said, everybody's different. There often is a genetic component. There often is our experiences that are traumatic in a person's life. Mental illnesses. There's a whole, the younger a person starts using, the fact that the neighborhood, if they're, people living in poverty are more likely to. So I think part of it is being a father. I'm always going to ask those questions, but ultimately I feel like, people get sick, and it's unfortunate, and I wish it did.
Just so you know, they don't put a manual about it. You had your hand up first. Okay.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for this, experience. And one of the joys for me was watching you as a dad watch him through the evening, because I could just tell by the look on your face. So I grew up in LA, the daughter of a dad who was a film and television producer, and I was trained from a young age to watch till the end of the credits. And if I'm not mistaken, Jasper was a PA. Is that correct?
And the art says.
Oh, okay. And I'm also was a stepmom, and my biological child was 10 years younger, and I'm also a child psychologist, and I can relate to your story in a number of ways. And when you were speaking about the guilt and all these things that you saw, I just felt compelled to tell you that what I saw was this lovely relationship between your half-sibs and how much they looked up to you. And when I was watching the credits, I was thinking, how could he be involved with his little kid? Because you're saying it was so long ago, and now. And so just sort of selfishly, curiously, how you're all doing as a blended family, because that's something that really spoke to me, and the warmth that you had in that relationship was special. So.
Well, Daisy and Jasper in the movie are, yeah, they're this big, and now, and they were blonde. I don't know where that came from. And now, you know, Daisy's 22 and Jasper's 25, and you know, Nick turned 36 this year. And, you know, I mean, the fact that I have a 36-year-old son, and I feel like I should be 36, but you know, it's sort of what I was saying before, that what doesn't kill you make you stronger, and I feel like, you know, that everybody, again, it's sort of amazing, I guess, as a father, of course, the idea that, you know, Daisy just came home because she's working now in the Bay Area. But Nick and Jasper live within a few miles of each other in LA, and up until recently Daisy did too, and you know, they would call me up and they were all in the car together and they were all going out to dinner or going surfing. Daisy and Nick would go surfing, you know, 4 times a week. She sort of organized her college schedule around the times that she could go surfing with Nick, and they go to movies together. And you know, it's amazing, and I think that, you know, you said, you know, you noticed how I look at them, and obviously I'm just so proud.
Honestly, the only thing I would say about that is, yeah, no, I mean, I'm so close with Jasper and Daisy, and I love them so much, but also, you know, I think it's true that it's I was reading some book, a woman who was a step-parent, and she was talking about the fact that, like, you never hear step-parents being, like, thanked in, like, awards ceremonies and stuff like that. And, but it really is such an incredible relationship, and, you know, now that I'm older, and I think about, you know, my stepmom coming into this family where there was, like, this little kid that was me, and, you know, just how hard that is, and, you know, I'm so grateful for my dad, of course, but I'm so grateful for my stepmom. I mean, she just has been such just a mom to me, and you know, I mean, I call her mom. You know, I really feel as close with her as if she. Well, I feel like she is my biological mom, even though she's not. So you know, that relationship is just so important, and I feel like I wish that people would sort of talk about it more, because it's such a. So many of us have these blended families, and it's you know, it's just amazing when we can sort of fall in love with these people that are part of this family that's created like that. So it's amazing.
Thank you for that update. That was
One here, and then we're going to move to the back of the room. We'll get
First of all, I have so much admiration and respect for both of you. You're absolutely, what you're doing is amazing. My 22-year-old son was killed in an accident that was alcohol and drug related. Then sometime after that, I went back to school and became a drug and alcohol therapist. And one of the things I thought was really crucial that you were saying about the dual diagnosis. I worked for many years at a recovery center called the Sequoia Center in Redwood City, and they did not deal with anything other than the addiction and you know, the recovery and the 12-step, and almost so many people there had a dual diagnosis. And so that was the one piece that was really missing from that, is that so many people were suffering from bipolar or depression or whatever. So I now work part-time at a center called Camden Center in Menlo Park, which is a mental health clinic that's for all that. And I was really happy to see that they've only been, they're in LA too, but in the peninsula they've only been here for a couple of years. So I think that's a step in the right direction. I still do hear and see the stigma with some people, including relatives, but thank you so much for what you're doing.
In the white sweater, you put your hand up before. Yes.
Just shout?
Yeah, go ahead, I'll repeat it.
I'll repeat it. Okay, so sort of 2 or 2.5 questions. Pick whatever you want to answer. unclear on how, I'm hoping that you can explain a little bit more on how it's, addiction is a brain disease, like a physiological condition, that can be treated with different medications, especially you mentioned this anti-addiction. And if that's the case, how is it, or how was it, that you now no longer even feel the urge? Are you on that medication, or did somehow you just work your way out of it, outgrow it in a sense? Second question. You guys have circulated a lot. I assume that you've maybe been to some low-income communities of color, where addiction, you mentioned that, you know, the environmental pressures make addiction primary for that. Have you found that you're able to connect to people in those situations, and are their dynamics similar, and how do they?
So
Well,
the
that
two-
was interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you very much. So, yeah, so the 2.5 questions were, so how is addiction a brain disease? And if so, how is it that you no longer have cravings? That's sort of the first part of it. And then the second part was about being in low.
Connecting with other
Different
kinds of-
socioeconomic.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask the expert here to explain in, you know, sort of as a concise explanation, why do we know that addiction is a brain disease?
we know it for lots of reasons. And one of the things, you know, it was interesting when I was coming to talk tonight, somebody said, oh, yeah, Nick, well, his thing was really like methamphetamine, right? But there aren't really those lanes, right? Now, it's not like a very neat, oh, I only do this, right? The common theme with all of these drugs, what it comes down to is it affects your reward system, and dopamine is affected by all of these medications. And there's a reward system in your brain, and there's the tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, and basically what happens is dopamine is exchanged across there, and that's how you feel pleasure. And people's reward systems work differently. So some people get a great amount of pleasure out of eating a brownie, right? And that'll get the dopamine flowing. Yeah. But methamphetamine will get a whole bunch more, right? And once that first time that you do it, it's phenomenal. And then you're always chasing that from thereafter, right? And it really gets to a point where you're no longer doing it to have fun or feel good. You're doing it so you don't feel miserable. And I have patients tell me that the only reason I'm using heroin is so that I don't get dope sick, because you really feel like you want to die, you know? Now, a lot of patients that I've treated follow the same sort of course where they do get onto a medication that brings down their cravings, and this idea of 12-step and medication, they're not mutually exclusive. All these things work together, and therapy and medication, and you get yourself into a place where you're not cured, but you've been healing over time, and your reward system gets re-regulated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the way the way I think about it is like when I smoked pot when I was 11 years old, it did something to my brain. I mean, I remember even before smoking pot, I remember my friend and I went to I was at a friend's house, and we were stealing liquor from the liquor cabinet at my friend's house. We were taking little bits of each alcohol from each bottle so that the parents wouldn't realize anyone was gone. So we mixed together this mixture of all these different alcohols, and my friend drank a little bit of it, and he was like, "Oh, this is disgusting," and stopped. And I drank it, and the feeling that gave me at 11 or 10 years old, however old I was, I loved the feeling that it gave me, and I drank that whole bottle, or the whole glass of what we'd mixed together, and then I threw up all night long, and then I wanted to do it again the next day. So, I mean, my brain just processes drugs and alcohol differently from a normal person, and I think, the reason I don't have cravings now, 100%, if I were to take if I were to drink a glass of wine right now, the cravings would come back. I mean, that would be all I could think about. That it's one drink or drug use away. But I do think I've had enough time away from it, and I've done a lot of work on myself, and I am on psychiatric medications, and I was on addiction medications to kind of break the cycle. and to start rerouting those brain pathways. So again, it's everything what you said. I'm the test tube example. Yeah. Oh, and then in terms of the, addiction is an equal opportunity destroyer, right? It doesn't matter what socioeconomic background you come from, what cultural background. Addiction really can affect anyone. And we were in Park City, Utah, which was like this very affluent community, and they were talking about the particular challenges of that community and how many young people there are using drugs. And then you can go to a place on the east side of Chicago and talk to young people there, and they have a very specific set of issues that they're dealing with, and so many of them are using drugs. So it really, each community has its own sort of set of circumstances that are unique, but that are challenging. And it really does feel like openness and honesty and talking about these issues really can connect us all across those different cultural divides and socioeconomic divides.
For sure, and the people we've met in different communities, everybody has the same insight in terms of the parents.
South side of Chicago, not east side.
Yeah, and it's just people who are desperate because they're dealing with this in their community. But there is a difference that we also see, and it is, this is America. It's not just about dealing with addiction, but it's about dealing with a million other problems that people deal with, and all kinds of health issues. But we visited. I don't know if Nick was with me, but I was at a reservation in northern Arizona, and then the problem there, the main drug was methamphetamine, and to the point that there were meth labs in this government housing, and these people told me that their child was crawling on the floor of their apartment, and only later was it discovered that the next apartment they were cooking meth, and the meth was seeping through the apartment, so their little baby was climbing. But they had the nearest medical clinic to where they lived was a 2.5-hour drive. So, it's not fair, but it's reality that there are different options. We were lucky. Listen to the numbers about Marin County. Why is is drug use so high here, and why are the overdose rates so high, and suicide is high? Why here? Why? Well, we can all imagine some of the issues that people are dealing with here. But the point is that it's not about, affluence isn't going to save somebody, but we do have more options for treatment. It's just a reality, and it's not fair in America. It's a travesty.
It's almost like you're suggesting healthcare should be a right. So I was told that we have time for one more question, and you had your hand up, but there's going to be a book signing here, so there's going to be lots of questions going on there. But let me ask one more question.
So this is, a parent education sort of, I think your current book is about that. So I want to ask, as a parent of teenagers, experimentation versus addiction. So you talked about the little boy you were with, and you each tried the alcohol. He took a sip, didn't like it, he was fine. Versus you, in that moment, maybe it was your first, dopamine. So we know kids around here experiment. I did. It is part of the rite of passage. What as parents do you suggest? How do you know if your kid's the addict versus they're taking one hit of marijuana to try it? So
the question is for people in the back, sort of experimentation versus addiction, people going through some sort of rite of passage, trying things. What's to say one person trying a hit of marijuana will be bad for them in the same way it could have been for Nick. So if you guys want to take that first.
Well, the first thing is that we know from all the science and all the research that if the younger a person tries drugs, the more likely they will be addicted. There's no guarantee that anybody will be. But sort of the assumptions that we have in our culture that our kids are going to try drugs, that it is a rite of passage, that's what they told me. When Nick was 11 years old, I found some marijuana in his backpack, completely freaked out. And I went to his school and I met the teacher and we met with the school counselor, and basically they said to me, the same thing, it's what kids are doing, in Marin County, everybody's, it's experimentation, it's normal, Nick's a great kid, he's a really good student, don't worry, basically. He said Nick's going to be fine, and of course Nick wasn't fine. And what I really wish they would have done is I wish they would have said, you have an 11-year-old child who's smoking marijuana. What's going on? Let's try to figure it out. No easy answers. Why? You know, how do we know about what if it's going to be okay or not? The answer is we don't know. And so we want to do everything we can to err on the side of caution, I believe, and do everything we can to postpone use if we can't prevent it. But also, this other part of it that people have talked about a lot here is that we do know that some people are more likely to become addicted than others. And we need to know that, and that's a big part of what we focus on, because if you have addiction in your family, you know that your child is more likely to become addicted. If you have an alcoholic father or grandfather or whatever, then there's a chance. It's not a guarantee that your child has a greater than average chance. If you've got mental illness in your family, or a child who is struggling in different ways in school, if somebody has learning disabilities, if somebody has an eating disorder, if somebody there's a whole list of things that mean that you have to pay even more special attention, because that child really is more at risk. You know, we've all experienced DARE, you know, the idea that people are going to come up and, you know, scare our kids about drugs, and we know that it doesn't work. It didn't work for any of us. It doesn't work. But what can work is if we first of all give kids knowledge, the facts. Ultimately, they're going to make the decision, so we want them to know the truth. And not blanket truths so they're meaningless, but you know, is marijuana okay? Is marijuana addictive? Kids right now will tell them, I mean, yeah, what they know, you're not supposed to shoot heroin, but marijuana, they say, is natural. It's not, you can't get addicted. You know, first of all, you can get addicted. About, I think, 12 or something % of kids who smoke pot end up, you know, addicted. I've gone to treatment centers where the only drug these kids have taken is marijuana. You don't go into treatment unless you're in real trouble. So anyway, all these things, there are no easy guaranteed answers, but we have to be aware of this stuff. And the other part of it is, besides giving knowledge about both the risk factors for addiction and specific impact of drugs on the brain, especially the brain of adolescents, is this other bigger issue, which is what is oftentimes, it was for Nick, and I know it is for, if not every kid who ends up having drug problems, most of them, drugs are a symptom of other problems.
Right.
And so we want to get as deep as we can to help our kids with whatever they're dealing with. If a kid is being bullied at school, if a kid is on the internet all the time and, you know, they're exposed to cyberbullying, or they're supposed to pornography, which, you know, is so confusing for little kids. If they're getting, you know, they're bombarded, you know, their whole thing about fear of missing out, you know, what they see on Instagram on Monday, all the kids at their school on the weekend, I mean, they're not posting pictures of themselves, you know, reading or walking with their friends or taking a hike in Muir Woods. What they're showing is that they're all getting high, they're getting wasted. So basically, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do to at least help and to try to make it less likely. No guarantees, you know.
No, it's good answer.